Welcome to What Shall We Say to These Things?
I'm TJ.
And I'm MJ.
And this is a low-key ghetto Bible study.
Right. So, this is the point where we ask you to pause the video and say a prayer.
Alright, so this time around, we're getting into Genesis chapter 15. And, just for the sake of context, let's just quickly look at what happened in 14. We had these two sides of alliances of kings, and one of them decides to go on a rampage, a warpath, and attacks Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot, who is Abraham's nephew, gets captured in the process. And Abraham takes 380 men who are trained servants in his household, and then he goes, rescues the day, saves Lot and all the other people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he gives Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem and a high priest of God, 10% as a tithe, and the king of Sodom is like, just give us back our people, you can keep everything else. And Abraham is like, nope, I don't want you saying you made me rich, but the guys who came with me, feed them, and these main guys, give them a portion. Alright? And so chapter 15 starts by telling us that after all of that has happened, after all of this drama and action, God speaks to Abraham in a vision and says to him, do not be afraid, I am your protector and I am your source of great reward. And you would think that Abraham's response would be, oh, that's great, God. Like, that's awesome. But instead he's like, what are you possibly going to give me as a reward when I have no children? Everything that I currently own is going to be left to my servant Eliezer of Damascus. And then he says, you have not given me any offspring. There is no one born in my house to be my heir. And God's response to Abraham is that this man Eliezer is not who I have intended to be your heir. Someone who is of your own flesh and blood will be your heir. And God takes Abraham outside, and I think I have this in my notes. I think a bit, but I was curious. Like, did he literally take him outside? Did he take him outside in the vision? What happens here? But we're told God took Abraham outside and tells him, look up at the sky and count the stars, if you can even keep track of them to count them. And then he tells him, this is how numerous your descendants are going to be. And at this point, Abraham trusts God. He puts his faith in God, and God counts this act of him, Abraham putting his faith in him, as righteousness. So he credits Abraham with righteousness for this. And God continues to speak to Abraham, and he says, I am the Lord who has brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and I'm going to give you ownership of this land. And then Abraham's like, oh, well, yeah, you're saying that, but how am I going to know? How will I really, really know that you're going to give me this land? And so God tells him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each of 3 years, and a dove and a young pigeon. And Abraham brought all of these to God, and he cut them in two and arranged the halves opposite to each other, but he did not cut the birds in half. And birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abraham chased them away. So that is our recap of Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 to 11.
Alright.
So, thoughts? Things that stood out to you.
So this was like, this one was a difficult one for me to think, but also, like, yeah, it was difficult to find, like, okay, I know, find anything new in the sense that, like, Abraham's story largely is, you know, it's so significant to the modern Christian, in the sense of, you know, our beliefs on salvation by faith. And so it was difficult to look at this with fresh eyes without all of the things that I've imbibed over time.
Been indoctrinated with.
Right. So this was difficult for me, but I tried to, as much as possible, to be indifferent, and I made the mistake of trying to read Bible commentaries, and now my head is even more muddled. But let's go through with what, and we'll see what we come to. My first question was like, Abraham just finished fighting like multiple armies. Well, I'm assuming it was multiple armies because it was alliances. And God feels the need to tell him, do not be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why would he, like, how is it so easy for the same faith that led him charging forward with 318 men, is dwindling at this point, and God has to remind him, I will protect you, I have good in store for you. But then one of the commentaries was saying that he just beat up an army. He has reason to be afraid.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there could be retaliation.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's just little old Abraham chilling in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Okay.
But to me, it's still a matter of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a matter of faith. God allowed you to have the victory. He's capable of protecting you. And so it was another one of those squints at Abraham moments.
My first point is pretty much identical to yours, except for instead of looking at the "do not be afraid, I will protect you," I was looking at the fact that Abraham asks, "What reward are you going to give me?" Like, this is the God who just helped you win a battle with 318 men against an alliance of 4 kings. How you asking what reward he gonna give? He could give you whatever you want. Like, he could give you anything, you know. You have just been offered all of the material property that you rescued from Sodom. Like, there is no limit to what you could possibly have. But I think it was a loaded question.
Okay.
I think it was a loaded question, which kind of takes me to my second point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where in chapter 13, is it chapter 13 or chapter 12? I should have made note of that. But in one of either chapter 13 or chapter 12, we already had God promising Abraham to have descendants as plentiful as the dust.
That is my second point.
Right? God has already promised him.
This is not a new conversation.
Right. God has already told him, I am going to give you, because God tells him, count the dust of the earth. That is how numerous your descendants are going to be.
So my questions were, did he not, did he forget, did he think God forgot? Or did he think that God was not being literal in the sense of descendants, literal, blood? But I don't know, like, to me, God keeps talking about seed, and to me that you
can't mistake that.
I don't understand,
especially not in that context.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm still squinting at Abraham right now.
Yeah, and that was my thing. I was like, God has told you, dust of the earth, your offspring will be as numerous. And here you are telling him about the servant that you're planning to make your heir.
Dude.
Yeah,
No.
So it was but I guess this is a takeaway, a lesson for me. But I have in my notes that Abraham doubted the dust, but he trusted the stars. So I don't know, was it like just that he needed the second statement, or was it that he preferred stars to dust? Because I don't think the stars are more numerous than dust. I don't think.
No, I don't know that.
I think it's in the sense that they're both things we can't count. So I really don't. I don't know what was going through Father Abraham's mind at that point in time, for him to have to decide to put faith in God when God told him, look at the stars, and when God said, look at the dust, he came back telling him about Eliezer.
I've heard an interpretation of this at a church service, and the speaker was saying that I got confused by reading the commentaries about this same point, but later down, it says, and as the sun was setting. And so if we're assuming that this chapter happens within one day, it means that when God brings him outside, it's still daytime.
But that is why I asked the question. Like, did God bring him outside in the vision?
Ah.
Because that is what I was talking about, right? Because, is it that God brings him outside early in the morning when it's still dark and they have this conversation, and the conversation takes the full extent of the day, or no, not the full extent of the day, because Abraham has to leave and go get the animals.
Right. So that the timing is not, because I was thinking it would be beautiful if he goes out in the day and the only star is the sun. And so I'm like, this is one of those beautiful calls forwards to the Messiah. But then some of the commentaries are like, we don't know what the span of time is, so it could be that that happens in the night, and then he has to do all the preparations, and by that time it's night again. So I don't know. But one of the minister I was listening to, what he was saying is that Abraham going out during the day, he's assuming that he goes out during the day, he sees the sun, but by faith he knows what the stars look like. By faith he accepts the promise. So it looks like Abraham is one of those people who need like to hear it a few times before they believe it, and so like
I can relate. I can relate.
Definitely.
But that's one of the things that I was wondering about, like, what is the timeline? Because you to tell me that God takes him out and tells him look at the stars, and then we told that the sun is setting, and I'm like, I think I had that as a note in the second part, because that's the sun setting comes in the next part.
Yeah. Okay.
You have anything else? I have a couple more points.
Where are we? What was the last thing? Oh, okay. So the question, I feel like this is verses 6 to 8. I was just looking at the juxtaposition is not the word I want to use, but like the very humanness of verses 6 to 8. So you have, it's just 3 verses. Verse 6, and we have, and Abraham's faith was God counted it to him as righteousness. Right? We have that line. He believed God, and God counted it to him as righteousness. You have these same points.
No, but like I understand.
Verse 7, God is like, this land is yours. I am the God who brought you out. And so we have God's promise again. This is your possession. This land will be your possession. Verse 8. But how can I know that this will happen?
That is a point. That is a point. Yeah. And I'm wondering, right? Like, did he think it would have been more difficult for God to give him that land than to give him the number of descendants as many as the stars? Like, you older than 75, and God is telling you, even now I will give you as many descendants as the stars, and you will believe that, but you will think it's more difficult. I mean, the same God who gave you victory with 318 men, right? Against an alliance of armies.
Yeah.
My thing is roller coaster much?
Yeah. We could give you whiplash. It's just 3 verses, but I can relate. That is the terrible part.
No, I think that's the honest
part.
human part.
Yes.
Yeah.
We want proof. We want evidence. We want tangible.
I don't think it's that, because when God told him to look at the stars, he didn't ask for proof there. Okay. Right? He was just like, I believe you. I believe you now. It took the second time. But I guess that's the thing. Abraham needs it twice. So he needed to hear the land again.
Alright. Okay. Alright. It was funny to me. And one of the commentaries I was reading was like, he didn't have a deed to the land. So he wanted, like, God could tell him it was his, but like, how could he let other people know?
Okay.
And I'm just like, at that point in time, you just live there. That's how you let
It's
people
mine.
know.
It's mine now. Me and my descendants as many as the stars.
Yes.
It's ours. I was thinking about. I'm moving forward now. God tells him these are the specific animals I want, this age, right? And then he proceeds to have to cut. Well, I don't know if he had to, but then we're told he cut them in half. And I'm thinking about cutting, like, I'm thinking about like cutting a frog in half, right? Because we did that. Did you do it? Did you have to do it?
Did.
Right. We had to do that in a particular biology class, and like just the tediousness of cutting a frog in half. No, we didn't cut it in half. We cut it open, right? Yeah. But think about having to cut an entire cow in half, right? A ram in half, a goat in half. That's gonna be a tedious process, and I'm even thinking about it using modern day instruments that he would not have had.
Oh yeah.
Alright, so it's very, very possible that just that process took him the whole day, which would bring us to sunset.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what I was wondering is also that the text tells us that God tells him to go and get the stuff, but we don't hear God give him any other instructions. So I was wondering, like, how does he know what to do?
But he's been building altars and making sacrifices for his entire journey. So I guess there's been some kind of blueprint with him and God as to how what the process is.
What?
Because when we look at Elisha at Mount Carmel, Elijah.
I'd never know.
I think it might be Elijah. At Mount Carmel, it might be Elisha. I don't know. One of the Eli at Mount Carmel. I feel like they cut. Well, no, I don't think they cut it in half, but they cut the sacrifice. The animal that was being sacrificed, it was cut as well. I don't remember if it was half. I feel like he said cut it in twain.
Oh,
I don't know.
But some of the commentaries are saying that this was a common practice for contracts and covenants.
Okay.
In that time, they're saying that somebody makes reference to it in, I think, Jeremiah. I don't know, but like, what? I
guess half for you, half for me.
They're saying that that's what it would appear to be, but then what it looks like it might have been is that you walk between together, reciting the terms of the agreement, and the punishment for if you don't keep your terms is what has been done to the animals.
Oh wow.
So like, that's terrifying. But that's what one of the commentaries was saying. I don't know if that is what
it actually
what was actually happening here.
Okay.
But we can know that it was definitely a contract, a covenant, between. I don't know if it's this. That's my problem with this chapter. It's like very, very, what's the word? Like, a lot of Christians have made it figurative, which I imagine that it is. I feel like a lot of what God did in the Old Testament was, there were signs and symbols. But like, I always get very anxious about, like, am I interpreting this the way it was intended to be?
Okay. And because at the end of the day, what he was doing then would have been a part of their literal customs and practices.
Okay.
Right. So I think while for us it may have figurative meaning, at that point, like you saying, that might have been the customs for agreements and for contracts. So I think
my biggest issue is that not all the commentaries
say the same thing.
Yeah, but not all of them say the same thing, but the general consensus is this is a contract, this is an agreement. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that well, I guess based on what God told him, he realized that we be going into a contract here. This is what this is. Yeah. My final note on this is that Abraham worked as a scarecrow.
but that was another note that one of the commentaries was saying, is that he had to wait for God to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So that, because I was wondering why they included that part,
Mm-hmm.
that he has to chase the vultures away, but that would indicate that he was there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't show up right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. So let's look at the last section of this chapter. We're looking at verses 12 to 21. So we're told that, as we just established, Abraham was waiting on God. He fell asleep as the sun was setting, and we're told that a dense darkness surrounded him. And God spoke to Abraham and warned him that his descendants would be slaves and would be mistreated in a country that was not their own for 400 years. But then God also told him that when that time was up, God would punish the nation that held them captive, and then Abraham's descendants would leave with great wealth. God then clarified that this captivity would not impact Abraham directly, but that he would die peacefully in his old age. But it would take 4 generations for Abraham's descendants to come to claim this land that God was given to him, because God was not ready to use them in judgment against the Amorites. And then, when the sun had fully set and it was completely dark, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp passed between the halves. On that day, God made a covenant with Abraham and said, I am giving this land to your descendants, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. They will have the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So that's the end of Genesis chapter 15. I realized I took a lot of notes for this chapter.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Not a lot of notes, but I had a lot of points.
Because I have very few for this second part.
Okay. Well, my first one had to do with what we just discussed already about. I was curious about the timeline.
Okay.
But we've already discussed that. For me, it was, God basically said, I have good news and bad news. I'll give you the bad news first. I'll give you the bad news first. You know, I found it interesting that he told Abraham that hey, your descendants are going to go into captivity. They're going to be enslaved. Because he didn't have to tell him that.
Like, he would live in peaceful bliss, not knowing.
And I wonder if, having known that, did he tell his children and his grandchildren that?
I mean, a lot of people believe Moses is writing this. So, Moses had to get it from somewhere.
Okay, it makes sense. That makes sense.
Unless Moses was one of those who got visions of what happened and then writes them down. We don't know.
Yeah, so like he basically tells Abraham, like, your descendants are going to be slaves for 400 years, and then I'll set them free and give them this land. So yes, I'm telling you the land is yours, but it's going to be a while before your descendants actually get to enjoy it.
Like, I find that so strange that like they were there because Jacob and his family moved from Canaan to Egypt. Wouldn't it have been like simpler to just stay there? I know that they needed food and they wanted to be near Joseph, but
I think there's a bigger picture, because he talks about not being ready to use them in judgment against the Amorites. And I think while they were living in Canaan, they were taking up a portion, but God has promised them the full extent
that makes sense
of the thing. So they had to go away,
increasing
number. And I think one of the commentaries I was saying is that God was basically waiting for the Amorites to like get to the full extent of their wickedness, and then
reach the threshold.
And then he would use Abraham's descendants to
wipe them out.
I don't know if it's necessarily wipe them out, but like punish them.
And I wonder, like, that's the part I'm not clear on. like, when are bad things punishment and when are they just bad things? Because like these 400 years of slavery, it's not like, God cursed Abraham's descendants. It's not one of those situations. It's not these wicked people thing. And he's already promising to punish Egypt for enslaving them. So like are we, I guess that's not our business either.
But cause I feel like we have the choice. We have choice, right?
So like Pharaoh could have been like, oh, look at these people who are growing in number, let me leave them alone.
Right. But then God foresaw that was not the choice he was going to make, and so he already planned his punishment.
Okay.
So I think it's
it's a little complex, I guess, because I feel like God could have intervened and been like, no, Pharaoh, these people are not going to be your slaves. But he was just like, it has to happen. I have to let it happen.
It said it spoke about 4 generations, right? And I was like, do they mean 4 generations from Abraham? And then I counted. I was like, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So it can't be 4 generations from Abraham, because 4 generations from Abraham is when they go into Egypt. So I was like, okay, so it means that 4 generations from Joseph is when they get out. And then I was like, that makes sense, because if they're there for 400 years, then that would be 4 generations on average. Well, especially with how long they would have been living for. Well, initially. Because by the time they go into slavery, I'm sure their lifespan would have been shortened.
Okay. What I was seeing was saying that, what I was looking at was also saying that generation might not be a literal, not necessarily that it's not literal, but like you're saying, it could usually refer to 100 years. Because like that would be a generation, that would be somebody's lifespan.
Yeah. At that time.
That time.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. We had a conversation, right, during the week, and I like reading it again and processing it. Can you imagine, right? You fall asleep and you wake up to see a stove and a lamp moving by themselves through the halves of these animals that you cut.
I tell you, I read it and I'm like, this is creepy. That's one of my notes. But like Abraham needed reassurance, and like God was like, here, have your assurance. And so
in a way that you would understand and recognize.
Right. Yeah. And but it's still like I'm very appreciative that I live in this time, and God is not going to try to speak to me like that because I understand. Like you kind of understand why every time these interactions with supernatural beings, they start with "do not be afraid," because fear, definitely fear-inducing. But I don't know if this is relevant because, like I was saying, the whole confusion melee situation. But one of the commentaries was saying that both parties are supposed to walk through, but God's representative was the only.
But maybe that's why there were 2 things.
Right, they're saying he made the covenant with himself. But there's another commentary that was like maybe Abraham walked before. So I'm not sure about that. But like I know that this chapter is very significant to salvation based on what I've been reading, very significant to salvation by faith through grace, because if we take it to believe that God made the covenant on his own, it was a situation where he was saying like I'm responsible. You understand?
On both sides.
I am making this covenant with myself. And in the sense that I'm swearing on myself.
Mhm.
You understand?
On my own name.
Right. And like it seems so strange to say that, like, if I don't come through on my promise. You understand what I'm saying? Like,
I will punish myself.
that doesn't make sense. But it was the, I guess, the explanation, the understanding that Abraham could not keep a part of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't keep a part.
Mhm.
Like, it was outside of his he wasn't qualified, he wasn't
Mhm.
eligible to sign that
Agreement.
He
Mhm.
had, he can't give himself the land, he can't give himself the descendants, he can't save himself, essentially. And so,
Mhm.
like,
He had no role to play in
he
that
had
whole
no
situation.
role to play.
Mhm.
And so I'm leaning more towards the God made
Mhm.
the contract with himself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get that. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to process. And I think we see that again when Jesus comes to die, because basically, is God
Paying his price.
Yeah.
Well, in the sense that
this, because the what you got, they're saying the payment for sin is death, and he's like, I'll die then.
right, yeah, this is what I require. Y'all can't do it.
I'll pay the price.
Yeah. Both the righteousness and the death. Y'all can't do the be righteous thing. I'll do it. And y'all.
You can't die this death.
Right.
I'll do it.
Yes. Or I don't want you to die this death. I'll do it. So this one was, reading the commentaries was a very, I think I'm finally beginning to grasp the whole, like, sit down, MG. like this is outside your pay grade.
This is not an agreement you can take part in.
Yeah, like, this is not, like, you can't do this. You can't do this. This is my job. I've taken it on myself, on my own, and you just sit down.
You said that what do you like? There's the song, the protection of his child and treasure was a charge that on himself he laid.
Yeah.
So it looks like he has the tendency of being like, I am God, I will put this on myself.
Yeah.
So my final point for this section is that God basically tells Abraham that God is going to take away land from so many different nations, and he's going to give it to Abraham's descendants. And he lists them. He tells them, I'm going to take these people's land, and I'll take these people's land, I'll take these people's land, and I'll take these people's land, and I'll give it to you and your family.
You remember the reward I was talking about earlier? Yeah, that's it. That's it.
I'll give you the kids and the land.
Yeah.
A 2-for-1. This was an interesting. It was not like the last chapter had like a lot of hype and drama, and this one was like a lot, not necessarily slower, but it was like a lot milder and mellower. But as you actually go through it, you realize the significance. The significance. You have anything else you want to share before we get into our lessons? No. Okay. So you want to tell us about what you learned about God?
Okay, so it's like basically that his word is reliable, and like I don't have to be like Abraham. I could like his word is enough. He is, the fact that it's coming from him is evidence enough that he's going to come through. He's going to be true to his promises. He's trustworthy. He's reliable. And I'm also reminded that he's patient.
That's my first point. That's my first point. God is patient with us.
Yeah. And I think he's going to work with us where we're at. If we are at the point where we need
reminders and reassurance.
Or like with Gideon, we need the wool wet and then we need it dry. He will do what it takes for us to get to the point where we believe him. Yeah. And I think that was that hit me in the feels, that part, that he'll work with me. I'm not where he wants me to be yet, and he'll hold my hand and be like, we'll get there.
Yeah. Certain aspects of this particular chapter reminded me of your presentation on the Shunammite woman. And so one of my takeaways is that God sees past our supposed contentment, and he will speak to the desires of our hearts. So, like, you could have looked at Abraham and seen, like, okay, he's a wealthy man, he seems okay.
He's already made the decision to pass on to Elisha.
Yeah, he's already appointed his heir. But God saw past that, and God saw that this man wants a son, and so God speaks to that, and he promises him not just a son, but that he will have descendants as plentiful as the dust of the earth and of the stars in the sky. And I think for me, particularly where I am right now in life, that one was like, God knows what I want. He knows what I want, and he can speak to that.
What's thing for me is like, Abraham wants a son. That's it. And like, God is like, oh, you want a son? I'm going to give you a gazillion descendants
and land to go with it.
Yeah. So it's like, it speaks of abundance. Like, even what we want is so much less than what he wants to give us.
And so that ties in nicely with my next point. And my main thing is, God is a go big every time. Like, they say go big or go home. God is like, we're going big every time. It's like, he was like, count the dust, that's how many. Count the stars, that's how many. And then, like, when it came to making the covenant, he could have, like, just sent a flame through. And he was like, nah, that's too basic. That's too basic. We're gonna have a flaming what was it called? A flaming
smoking oven?
A smoking oven and a flaming torch. We're gonna have both too. Like, we're gonna have all this. So God is extra. But one of the things, bringing it down and bringing it back down to like a calm level. Seeing that he took, like, okay, so God was aware, right, that Abraham had just doubted him in terms of what is the reward, and he was also aware that Abraham was about to doubt him again about the land, right? But in the moment where Abraham chose to believe, yes, God, you saying this, you will give me descendants as many as the stars. When Abraham chose to believe in that moment, God put aside the past and he did not take into account the future, but he accounted that act of faith in that moment as righteousness. And so I know, like we've been saying, he's not going to hold my past against me. And in this case, we're also reminded that he does not take the future into consideration when he's dealing with us in the moment. And so he will take my individual acts of faith moment by moment and credited to me as righteousness.
That's reassuring. So our
life application, I only have one, so you can go ahead.
Okay, so I was thinking about the fact that God knew and he told Abraham about the slavery. And every time I processed that, God knew this bad thing was going to happen, and he never stepped in to prevent it. It reminds me that, even the bad have to be for my good or for his glory, and sometimes both. Right? And then I was also processing that Abraham's life, it's just this chapter on a whole, and especially those 3 verses, but those 3 verses are characteristic of his life.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me that our journey of faith isn't linear.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so he had these really good, strong faith moments, and then there are these moments where he's like, God didn't tell me I was going to have a son. I'm going to my generations, my line is going to die out, and you could feel his disappointment and his frustration, and so it's just a reminder that there are going to be bad days where we not sure that we necessarily believe what God has said, what He's promised, and that's okay. God is going to be there, and He's going to give us what we need to believe in Him. And the final thing was that I'm realizing more and more that one of the major components of faith is patience. It's about understanding that God has given the promise, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen now.
Right now.
It doesn't mean it's going to happen right now. And like waiting for it can be frustrating, but just because we haven't seen it yet doesn't mean God has forgotten us, doesn't mean God has changed his mind. We just need to wait.
That's a beautiful thought. Well, like, the only thing I have in terms of my lessons is that I can take God at his word all the time.
Amen. Yeah. It's his word is enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Okay. So that has been Genesis chapter 50.
Yes, and we're looking forward to Genesis 16. I've been looking forward to Genesis 16 to judge Sarai.
But we'll get to that next time.
Yes. So this has been What Shall We Say to These Things?
I'm TJ.
And I'm MJ.
And until next time,
We're
we're
out.
out.